We have a guest speaker. We're gonna ask Jason Gostiaux to give us a report on the fisheries of Lake Fenton, and we'll be able to ask him questions when he's done, and then we'll get on with the rest of our business. Jason.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Gostiaux. I'm a fisheries biologist with the Michigan DNR out of the Southern Lake Huron Management Unit. Today we're going to have a discussion. I'm going to give you a little background about myself and a little bit about what a fisheries biologist does with the DNR. We'll talk about some of the survey work that's been going on at Lake Fenton, and a little bit about the stocking strategy with regard to walleye in Lake Fenton. We'll have some time for questions. I suspect that this may be the first of several meetings that I attend, because generally this gets a lot of ideas flowing and a lot of discussion and dialogue. So don't feel like we have to cover everything this minute. I can leave some business cards, and now we've got some contact information that's been shared back and forth between Pat and myself and Mark and myself. So you'll know how to get a hold of me. And like I said, I think this is going to start some healthy dialogue between myself as a relatively new fisheries biologist, and then you all as more local, stakeholders of the Lake Fenton aquatic resources. Dane.
All right, hold on.
Don.
Well, no, it is there.
So I grew up, I was actually talking with some folks before we started here. I was born in Germany when my dad was in the Army, but originally from Southeast Michigan, in Royal Oak is where I grew up. I've been an avid angler my whole life, so we'll keep this presentation focused on work, but maybe we can have one in the future about hobbies. That would be fun. I have a bachelor's degree from Lake Superior State University, focusing on fisheries management, and then also a master's degree focused on fisheries management from University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. I was hired in this role back in January of 2020, so still pretty fresh in terms of the staff around the state, towards the lower end in terms of tenure in this position. And currently I work in our Bay City office. And you can go to the next slide there, Mark. So on the left here, you'll see this is a map of our coverage area. It's split up between two biologists, myself and April Simmons, and our unit supervisor is Jeff Jolly. It's pretty impressive, the amount of area that we cover, and this is all the public lakes and streams, and that's an important piece or context of this presentation when we talk about kind of the timing of some of our surveys and maybe how long it takes to get from one lake and get back to that lake again. One of the things that's important is understanding the different divisions that are within Michigan DNR. So, for example, I mentioned I work for the Fisheries Division, but for instance, you have a public boat launch on Lake Fenton. That is actually operated, maintained, and under the jurisdiction of the Parks and Rec Division. So for anyone that wasn't aware, if you have questions, comments, concerns, those are, those they come to me, shuffling them to Parks Division. So we certainly work with other divisions, but sometimes it's nice to know who actually is in charge of the different public entities that we have out there. Management is based up by watersheds. So it's a little bit difficult to see it in that picture. But we have, like right now, we are down here in Genesee County, and I oversee, like I said, public lakes and streams in the major watersheds of the Southern Lake Huron Management Unit. So Shiawassee, Flint, Cass, up in the Thumb, the Pigeon, Wisconsin drains, and then Birch Willow over on the eastern part of the Thumb. So quite an expansive area that any fisheries biologist in Michigan covers. And for my position, like I said, managing the aquatic resources in public lakes and streams. Next slide, please.
Didn't say dang.
So one of the programs that we have for fisheries surveys started back in 2008, and this is a standardized protocol with an established set of rules, if you will, or guidelines for how a survey is conducted. And it lays out the type of equipment we're going to use, the time of year that we're going to conduct the survey, and then the information that we're going to gain from that. As you can see there, that first bullet, the main objective of this work is to collect representative information on as many species as possible. the status and trends program isn't great at one thing or one species. It's good at a lot of different things. So we're trying to go in, use a variety of gears, survey the lake during spring or early summer, and pretty much get a snapshot of the species that are there, some growth information, some relative abundance information. And that's all encapsulated in that status and trend sampling program. Like I said, this was a program that started in 2008, and Lake Fenton was last surveyed with that protocol in 2011. We have in our management unit 106 public lakes that are in a list that we conduct this survey for. And so we are able to accomplish 6 to 8 of these surveys every spring, early summer. So it takes us a while to get back through the list. And we're actually fortunate. Our list is 106. Several other management units in Michigan have a list of public lakes that is so long that a fisheries biologist won't get back to the same lake that they sampled during their tenure.
Wow.
It's over 20 years to get back to some of these lakes in other areas because we do have so many bodies of water and unfortunately so few staff.
Yeah, it sounds inefficient.
We have there's some information that's recently been coming out in terms of the surface area of water that we manage per biologist in Michigan, and we rank towards the top in the entire country just because we have so much water and so few people, unfortunately. But with that said, I looked ahead at the sampling plan and looked at that list, and I would expect we'll be back to Lake Fenton in the next 3 to 5 years. Again, kind of picking away at our 6 to 8 lakes each year. And we can talk about that. That may seem like, it's taking you 15 years or more to get back here. What are some reasons that you think that's acceptable? What are some reasons that we think that is unacceptable? So we can talk about that, but I'd like to get into the results from the last survey in 2011. Ding. So a few highlights here. Over 2,000 fish were collected in that survey, and 27 different species were represented in Lake Fenton. Bluegill were the most abundant species collected, a variety of other panfish, crappie, pumpkin seed, rock bass. You can see the list there. The top predators that we collected were long-nosed gar, northern pike, large and smallmouth bass, and walleye, and then a variety of forage species. It's good to see from a fisheries biologist or management perspective, it's good to see the diversity as well as a variety of forage items available for those different predator species. It lends itself to demonstrate that Lake Fenton has, a balanced fish community, but you can tease apart some of that with looking at some growth information that we collect from those surveys. And that leads to that last point there. In our survey, we caught a number of northern pike, but the growth rates were well below the statewide average. What are some reasons for that? It can be related to habitat, it can be related to forage, it can be related to abundance. So in the fish world, the more fish you have, sometimes that can result in slower growth. There's a finite amount of resources. When you have an overabundant population, you have fewer resources for each individual. One of the ways to go about addressing that concern is to change management regulations, fishing regulations, allow more harvest of northern pike. But I will say that doesn't always get you the answer you want. Oftentimes, we, being humans living on lakes, dealing with lakes, are guilty in trying to always manipulate things with the intent to get what we want from them. And very often we change regulations in different systems and we go back to do some, evaluation work, and it doesn't always manifest itself in the perfect answer. It's not always the plug and play, pull the management lever and out pops your perfect answer. So something that we can talk about or investigate further. We just wanted something to pull out from that survey and pass along to you all that there was that slow growth of northern pike. However, it's not unique to just Lake Fenton. It's often something that we see in a variety of systems in Michigan.
Jason, do you want us to hold the last questions?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Yep. Next slide, please. In addition to the fish community work that we do for the Status and Trends program, we also look at some of the habitat features around the lake. We document some information about the thermocline, which is that rapid change in water temperature as you go down in depth. We look at the number of docks and dwellings along the shore. We look at the amount of coarse woody habitat or fallen trees. We take estimates for the amount of armored shoreline, so comparing how much seawall to how much natural shoreline there is in the lake. And one of the things that stuck out in the 2011 survey was that there was a note from the previous biologist, Joe Leonardi, that suggested aquatic vegetation was sparse for that time of year. So this survey occurred in 2011, I think, towards the second half of May, which you would expect to see some aquatic vegetation growing. And as I know, with several lakes in Southeast Michigan, and again, across the state as a whole, there's a fine balance between aquatic vegetation management and weighing all of the different user groups and their opinions and how we go about managing weeds in a system. And so that's one of the high priority topics that I think we may end up discussing, if not tonight, then in the future for sure. Next slide, please. One specific management action that has been going on in Lake Fenton for a number of years is a walleye stocking program. This began in the early 1980s, and from what I can gather, it was to essentially provide another inland walleye opportunity for anglers. I think at that time we didn't have quite the walleye fishery we do now in Saginaw Bay, Lake Erie, Detroit River, Lake St. Clair. And so we were able to raise fish. And then again, I don't know all of the decisions that went into selecting Lake Fenton and other systems, but I think, again, the idea was to provide some inland walleye fisheries for anglers and not just all focus on the Great Lakes. Again, that was a time where the fisheries out in Saginaw Bay were not operating as highly as they are right now. Since 1990, the lake has been stocked pretty much every other year. But as I mentioned to you, that 2011 survey occurred for the whole fish community. And because of the amount of systems we have, we don't always have great species or stocking evaluations from our stock bodies of water. Lake Fenton, I would say, does have some information, but as a scientist, as a manager, I always want more data. There's some anecdotal reports from anglers about having very successful walleye trips out on Lake Fenton. When I was here stocking fish in June, myself and the technician, we stocked Lake Fenton and went across to Lake Penema. An angler that we talked to said that Lake Fenton and Lake Penema have excellent walleye fisheries. That person and their friend have gone out, in the summer consistently and caught a lot of walleye, and also really spoke highly of the ice fishery. So one of my objectives with meeting with you all and kind of forming this working relationship is to hopefully get some more feedback from not only the walleye fishery, but just your anecdotal fishing reports. That's always useful information to me when I go, as the fisheries biologist or manager for this system. Specifically with the walleye stocking strategy, we've had a bit of a shift in how we allocate our fish to be stocked. So all of the walleye that we stock across our coverage area are all raised in walleye ponds that we operate that are between 6 and 12 acres. And there's some different mindsets when you harvest those ponds to stock your fish. So one idea is I want to make sure I fulfill all of the management unit needs first before I look outside of our management unit to other places. So when we are harvesting walleye from those ponds, we would take our fish, however many 100,000 that may be, first. We typically raise about 1 million in our ponds. If we need 250,000, we'll take ours first, fulfill our needs, then start to distribute outside of our management unit to others, other units that aren't able to raise as many. The downside with that is, no, the length of a spring fingerling walleye isn't very much bigger from 1 week to the next. They're about 2 inches long, but the weight of those individual fish in terms of small fish is quite a bit different. So for example, the last few stocking events at Lake Fenton, we put in our fish, and on average, they were 1,000 to 1,200 fish per pound. So if you think of it in your hand, if you're going to hold something that's 1 pound, now put 1,000 little squirming fish in there, right? Okay, that's one stocking event. This idea of shifting to heavier fish providing other management units with some of our early harvested walleye, waiting a couple of weeks and taking the second batch, if you will. The more recent stocking events for walleye in Lake Fenton have been 600 per pound. So we are stocking a much larger biomass with the same number of fish. Those, that 1 pound of 1,000 fish squiggling in your hand, now there's, it takes half of them to get to 1 pound. It's just something that we can tweak a little bit and try to get some better survival. What is the reason for better survival? When I came in as a biologist and looked at the data in Lake Fenton, I said, we have an opportunity to try to improve our survival, and through some of the work that I had seen, maybe there wasn't as good a walleye survival as we had hoped. This is one way to try and address that, but it takes some years to have those fish survive, sample for them, look at some of the population levels and determine if it did work in achieving, a quality walleye fishery. I think, Mark, I have one more slide after this, and then depending on time, I hope we have a few minutes for some questions. I know I'm passionate about these topics, so I can easily go on for a long time. So I decided to pick a few, these are sort of the management levers, if you will. So I looked at these management levers: habitat, regulations, and stocking. And then I came up with some things to consider in the future and possibly recommendations from a fisheries biologist perspective. First, looking at habitat, in my opinion, reverting some of the steel seawall to natural shoreline will get you a more healthy lake. That's a phrase that I'm already hearing in just a short time of being here. There's a lot of focus on the water itself being healthy, but it's also not, let's not look away from the shoreline and kind of the watershed around Lake Fenton as well, and how can we actually improve the health of those locations. Of course, we have that weed management strategy. Like I said, you have a variety of different stakeholder groups, and they probably all have different visions for what weed management looks like. And from my perspective, my recommendation is to focus on weed management and not weed eradication. Right. There's some value in having weeds for not only fish habitat, but also ecosystem services. On the flip side, nobody wants to back out of their dock and have their boat get bogged down in a mat of weeds, right? So you got to be realistic what your expectations are. In terms of regulations, I think right now we don't need to necessarily go down a deep dialogue in terms of increasing the bag limit for northern pike, but that is something that if I was looking at regulation options that I would consider if there was value in trying to improve those northern pike growth rates, with the understanding that pulling a management lever doesn't always give us the outcome that we desire, but it's still something that we can try. And then lastly, the stocking strategy for walleye. We did revise that stocking strategy like I described, and we have some plans in the future to evaluate the success of that through some fall surveys, as well as in the future doing a complete population estimate for walleye in Lake Fenton, and we're able to look and see what contribution of the previous year classes are made up from which year, and that kind of you can tease apart the survival of the stock fish. So I know that might have been a 40,000 foot view of fisheries biology and Lake Fenton, but I believe, like I said, we're gonna have a good dialogue not only tonight but into the future, and I look forward to handling your questions.